Waking up one day, I began to get ready for work. I kissed my faithful wife, who did not give any reason to worry. I also hugged my daughter, who was going to school. For me, it should have been an ordinary day, which did not differ much from each other over the last few years of my life. But my harmony was interrupted by one person, because of whom I had to commit many stupid actions.
Working behind the counter of our auto parts store, I encountered an unexpected visitor. A man in an elegant suit approached me, briefly flashing an official ID. "I didn't quite catch your name. Could you show your ID again, but more clearly?" I asked politely, as everything had happened too fast. The man, frowning, took out his wallet again and presented several impressive credentials. I carefully examined them before taking photos with my phone. "I think you shouldn't have done that," he noted, showing concern. "But you saw how I did it, right?" I smiled in response. "Damn, yes, you took a photo. How can I now be sure that you won't do anything with it?" he asked, still worried. "I won't post your personal information anywhere," I reassured him, emphasizing that I had no bad intentions. "Maybe I just want to remember your name and badge number just in case," I added, contemplating possible scenarios. He looked at me suspiciously, as if trying to decipher my intentions. "You act suspiciously for someone who hasn't done anything wrong," he observed, introducing himself as Detective Sampson. "And you are extremely suspicious for a detective who has never accused me," I countered, highlighting my respect for the law, nurtured among police officers, including my cousin Kevin, who advised always photographing the IDs of strangers. The situation escalated when the detective demanded to know where I was last night at midnight, while the other customers watched the unfolding events with cautious curiosity. I didn't know exactly what the detective was looking for, but I was sure that it would be better to discuss this matter in private. I invited the detective to step away from the counter and come to my office so we could discuss the matter privately, without any eavesdroppers. After we settled in my office, the detective, who clearly couldn't contain his impatience, resumed his questioning. He was interested in where I was last night at midnight. I warned him that if he came to my store again and started asking questions loudly in front of my customers and staff, I would have to kick him out. "Try to behave professionally," I strongly advised him, to which he retorted that I had no right to kick him out, as he was a police detective. When I demanded to see a warrant, he admitted that he had come to ask me a few questions, but did so less rudely. "That's why I suggested moving our conversation here, to my office. You have the right to ask questions, but I also have the right to protect my property," I explained to him before answering his question. I emphasized that I had spent the entire evening and night at home. I left work at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and was home by 4:30 and did not go out again. My daughter and wife were with me all night, so they can confirm my alibi, I assured Detective Sampson. He asked if anyone else could confirm my presence at home, to which I replied affirmatively. When Sampson mentioned that my wife said I had been sleeping on the couch, he suggested that I could have left for a few hours and returned without being noticed. "You spoke to my wife?" I was surprised. He continued to question me about Barry Lasser, whom I stated I had never heard of and probably never met. The detective persisted, inquiring whether I knew where he lived, and mentioned him in the past tense, which led me to suspect that something had happened to him. "If I didn't know the man, how could I know where he lived?" I responded. Sampson continued to ask about possible connections between my wife and Lasser, questioning whether I had seen any messages from him. I noted that he skillfully phrased the same question differently, but made it clear that I had never heard his name and, accordingly, had not seen any messages. "I sense something is wrong here, but why are you asking me about this person?" I concluded, expressing my confusion and suspicion. Last night something irreversible happened. His life was ended in a merciless fight. At that moment, Detective Sampson stood before me, his gaze piercing. "You hold a special place in our investigation. Maybe it's time to reconsider your version of events," he asked, as if playing a psychological game. Trying to maintain my composure, I replied, Why would I kill a man I wasn't even acquainted with? You know, there are cases when husbands, upon learning of an affair, lose control and attack their wife's lover, Samson continued, scrutinizing my reactions. Are you saying that Sandra with that guy? I managed to say, demanding explanations. The detective's response was cold. Your wife claims their affair has been going on for 2 months. How long have you known about this? He asked. About a minute ago, I blurted out, barely containing a surge of anger. This conversation is over. I need to talk to Sandra, I said, standing up. However, Samson was adamant. The court has issued a restraining order. You can't come within 100 yards of her. My head was spinning with the news. Not just the affair, but also Sandra and our daughter's fear of me, as if I could become a murderer. Does Sandra really think that? I asked, feeling my heart sink in despair. They both want to protect themselves from you, Samson replied. And how am I supposed to prove now that I am incapable of murder? I asked, trying to find some sort of clue. We will check every detail, but do not leave town for now, he warned. My attempts to defend my freedom were met with threats from local authorities and warnings about possible arrest. My entire world was turned upside down, from misunderstanding to rage and despair. I found myself trapped in circumstances far more complex and darker than I could have imagined. While I tried not to give in to my personal feelings in front of colleagues and clients, Detective Samson, leaving my office with a smirk, left me puzzled. I was sure he would stop at nothing to implicate me in murder. Suddenly, my brother Dennis appeared at the door of my office. He entered, quietly closed the door behind him, and sat down, asking what happened. I shared with him the details of the meeting with Samson, not forgetting to mention how he insistently asked me not to leave town and how mysteriously he linked me to Mayor Smith, who wanted to see me behind bars. What are your plans? You can't stay here. This guy will be after you, Dennis remarked worriedly. He feared for my safety, especially in case of an encounter with Sandra, which could lead to arrest. I agreed with his concerns and decided that the best thing would be to just get in my truck and drive away, hoping the real culprit would be found. Dennis suggested I not return home and just start traveling. Use your credit card for necessary purchases. Take your laptop so I can keep you informed, he advised, wishing me to stay safe. Thus, at 3 p.m, I headed south on the highway. During the trip, I reflected on how rapidly my life had changed. The night before, an argument with Sandra about sex, or rather its absence, was the last straw. Sandra became distant and cooled towards me, which became a serious problem in our marriage. We used to find time for intimacy at least a couple of times a week, but she had refused me the last time. She accused me of selfishness, claiming that my desires do not justify ignoring her feelings. She was adamant. For her to feel desired and loved, romance and attention were needed, not just physical closeness. This conversation made me spend the night on the couch pondering the reasons for her indifference towards me. Doubts filled my mind. It seemed she was finding solace in the arms of another, leaving me aside. These thoughts only intensified my anger and sense of betrayal. The next day, I found myself far from home. Deciding to stretch my legs in one of the local parks of an industrial town, I unexpectedly encountered a shabbily dressed man who, despite my confidence in my own strength, caused me alarm when he pointed a gun at me. His demand was succinct: "Come with me." Under his vigilant gaze, I approached an old Explorer, where he politely invited me to take the passenger seat. Getting into the car and buckling up, I noticed his concern for safety. The man walked around the car, sat behind the wheel, and, taking a bag from the back seat, began preparing for the journey ahead. I looked for a moment to take the initiative, but he didn't give me a chance. Despite his unkempt appearance, it was clear that he knew what he was doing. Grabbing the bag, I found inside a long lab coat, a soft hat, latex gloves, and dark glasses. At the moment, we parked near the abandoned sawmill, My companion, with a businesslike air, made me dress in this strange outfit. "Looks like we're off to a masquerade, pretending to be the Blues Brothers," I joked nervously, trying to hide my anxiety. In response, he just snorted and nodded for me to buckle up. It wasn't 5 minutes before we were in the bank's parking lot, and my jokes quickly turned to alarm. He got out to open my door and handed me a cloth sack. "Just keep it open, I'll handle the money," he said, as if it were the most mundane task. I barely managed to muster the courage to object when the cold metal of a gun at my forehead silenced me. The strangeness of the situation peaked when we entered the bank. It seemed to take an eternity for the tellers to realize that something was amiss. Their smiles vanished only when my partner aimed the gun at them and ordered them to fill the sack with money. Bank security, in the form of a thick acrylic panel, complicated the task, but soon the money began to accumulate in the sack. However, the silence was broken by the distant sound of sirens, getting closer and inducing panic within me. "Damn it, I told you not to call the police!" my companion yelled at one of the tellers. The situation escalated to the extreme when he, unable to contain his anger, shot the teller. Chaos ensued in the building. Hostages started running in all directions, and my inadequate partner began shooting at anything that moved. Ironically, one of the bullets ricocheted and hit him. I realized this was my chance to escape. I quickly made it outside, and the sound of sirens was getting closer, with very little time left. So I decided to run through the nearest forest. Having run only a few meters through the forest, I emerged onto a clearing on a hill and paused for a moment to assess the situation. Looking around for possible pursuers, I remembered the running training I had devoted time to a few years ago, aiming to lose weight. These exercises not only helped me shed the extra pounds, but also prepared me for such unexpected challenges. Being approximately half a mile from where I had left my truck, I was anxiously trying to figure out if the police had noticed it. Confident that there was nobody around the park near the old ash tree, I discovered something that reminded me of a groundhog's burrow. Discarding the lab coat I had worn during the robbery, I carefully hid it in this burrow along with my hat, then camouflaged them with dirt. I decided to throw my dark glasses into a tree hollow. At that moment, I realized I was still holding the bag of money, whose ink had already dried. Lowering the bag to the ground, I cautiously opened it with a long stick. I collected 3 spoiled bundles and hid them in the tree hollow along with the dark glasses. Approaching my truck, I was on edge, expecting to be surrounded by police at any moment, but that did not happen. I started the truck and drove in the direction opposite to the bank. Several hours passed before I could relax a bit, realizing that I might have managed to evade punishment. My accomplice, not knowing my name, could not turn me into the police. At best, he could only describe my appearance, but I had seen enough police sketches to understand that the likelihood of being recognized this way was extremely slim. The bank's cameras captured only a person in a lab coat, a large hat, and dark glasses, making my identification almost impossible. I touched nothing without gloves, trying not to leave fingerprints. The confidence that the police would be my next step, waiting for the money to appear, seemed unlikely to me, since the serial numbers were probably not pre-recorded unless they had a prepared list of numbers in case of a robbery. I had never felt the need for money to the extent of considering it my only goal, especially when it was about a few thousand hidden in a bag. The idea of spending them, risking being caught within an hour, seemed absurd to me. My attention was drawn to a construction site, next to which cars were lined up, ready to cross the road. Looking in the rearview mirror, I noticed that there were no cars behind me. That's where I stopped next to a brand new Chevrolet Silverado, adorned with club emblems and Texas plates. In the bed of this truck were 2 bicycles, coolers for kayaks, and other equipment for active recreation. I quickly transferred my bag of money into its bed. At that moment, all the attention was on a huge vehicle crossing the highway, and nobody noticed the money being moved from my truck to another's. After exiting the highway at the next off-ramp, I took the back roads. Eventually, I discarded the latex gloves by throwing them off a bridge into the river, and by nightfall, I had stopped in the next small town. At a local motel, I slept peacefully for a full 10 hours and decided to check my email and the news about recent bank robberies through Google Glow the next morning. Dennis had sent a brief message mentioning that neither my wife nor my daughter had tried to contact me at work. The whole town was abuzz with news of a murder. Rumors had it that the police were looking for me for the murder of Sandra's lover and attempting to evade justice. It was interesting to find out that other married men were also considered possible suspects in the murder. It seemed Barry Lasser had quite a few married admirers. Dennis also informed me that a bank robbery had occurred as I was leaving town, during which one person was injured, and the robber managed to escape with an unspecified amount of cash. Then, I searched for bank robberies and found that my bank topped the list, followed by a robbery at a house in Blandon. Having achieved the pinnacle in the world of SEO on Google Glow, I found that neither my name nor my business was mentioned. Instead, Billy Bob Jenkins was in the spotlight for trying to kill a cashier for her beauty and accidentally shooting himself in the head. Not exactly what was discussed in the article, but I had witnessed the event and knew the truth. Billy Bob had also aimed at another cashier with a beautiful smile, but the bullet ricocheted off the bag of money he was holding, causing a paint explosion and covering Billy Bob. Well, you get the picture. Enraged and poisoned by lead, Billy Bob tried to shoot his accomplice, who managed to escape. Shooting at the passenger window of his car, Billy Bob missed. At this time, the police were searching for his accomplice in the woods behind the bank, confident of his imminent arrest. After the failed murder attempt, Billy Bob fell into a coma from the bullet in his head and couldn't provide the police with any information about his partner. A subsequent article described how the police tracked the stolen money to a congressman's family from Texas, who were vacationing and visiting the Biltmore estate in Asheville, North Carolina. While Congressman Johnson and his wife toured the estate, their sons were spending money like sailors on leave. Congressman Johnson denied any knowledge of the money's origin, but after questioning, his sons confessed to finding it in a suitcase with more than $7,000, slightly stained with paint. The police are still trying to figure out who in the family could have been involved in the robbery. This situation not only gave me a chance to clear my name, but also inadvertently entangled a high-ranking politician in scandal, turning into incredible luck for me. Finding myself in the hills of South Carolina, I deliberately sought refuge from all my troubles, aiming to avoid any attention. The situation was so tense that I almost expected to be immediately arrested for a crime that seemed unbelievable, the murder of my wife's lover, even though I was already on the verge of being jailed for another matter. Traveling through this region, I discovered many unique places and attractions that could hold my interest for a few days. One day, as I was driving down a dirt road, my eyes caught sight of an old pickup truck abandoned on the side of the road. There were 2 passengers standing by it, looking at the open hood with visible perplexity. Deciding to help, I pulled up closer and offered my assistance. They were so alike that it became immediately clear. I was facing sisters, both around 30 years of age. After introducing myself, I learned that one of them was Libby and the other was Abby. Their pickup had suddenly broken down and refused to start. Upon inspecting under the hood, I noticed that the issue was with a severely rusted battery terminal. During the cleaning process, the cable broke. Immediately offering my help, I assured them that I had the necessary tools and spare parts in my truck, as I had done similar repairs before. Libby, watching my actions with interest, was charmed by my skill. After about half an hour of effort, I managed to replace the cable and clean the terminals, after which the pickup started without any trouble. The sisters' joy was boundless. As a token of gratitude, Libby offered me a cup of homemade unsweetened tea from a thermos. Abby, with a playful smile, suggested something more personal as thanks, emphasizing their appreciation for the help provided. Finding myself in the company of 2 charming ladies, I never thought that my next 20 years would be associated with anyone other than Sandra. Yet, the offer made to me required more refined seductions than just the opportunity to share a bed with 2 sisters. Thank you, but I'll stick with the tea, I remarked, taking a sip of the drink with an unusual taste. When I returned the cup to Abby, I noticed their expectant looks. My awakening was slow and vague. Lying on a soft, bed-like object, I initially thought I was at sea, until I realized it was Abby, unclothed, rolling on top of me, her chest vibrating back and forth, causing me pleasant sensations. Is this a dream? I thought, trying to touch her, only to find my hands were handcuffed. What's happening? I barely managed to say after several unsuccessful attempts to speak, feeling my throat parched. I'm just returning the favor for your kindness, Abby said with a smile. My mind finally began to clear, and I started to ponder how I ended up in such a situation. It seemed my alter ego had awakened before me and experienced incredible pleasure. Sex with my wife was always good, but this was something else. Impressive, Abby praised, sliding off me and lying down beside me. I bet I'm already pregnant, she concluded with a light smile. It took me a few minutes to come to my senses and realize that I was lying tied up in their bed. These two crazy sisters tied me up and drugged me with a substance I didn't understand, so that eventually they could both get pregnant from me. When I came to my senses, more or less, and saw how the second sister began to massage my little friend, I began to resist. What the hell am I tied up with, and what did you get me drunk on? I asked, and they gave me a straight answer so that we could get pregnant. They were older girls and they already needed to think about children, but they did not want to build a serious relationship, so they noticed that I would be an excellent donor for their pregnancy. I almost threw up at the thought, but they said that all they needed from me was pregnancy and nothing more. They were not going to haunt me for the rest of my life. I said that I was ready to fulfill their damn conditions, but only if I was not bound and would be conscious. As a result, they released me, fed me, and gave me a Viagra pill, which made my next 3 days go by in a blur. I was already feeling physically and mentally ill. The time was mostly spent in bed, where I took care of my sisters, then rested to recover in the evening. On the third day, the three of us realized that it was enough for the night, and just slept together on a large bed without unnecessary intrigue. We had a great time, Abby said, hugging me goodbye, and asked me never to try to establish a relationship with children, assuming that I might want to prove paternity. I nodded, agreeing with her, taking her words not as a threat, but as a request. Don't worry, you won't see me again, I said, promising not to call or write, and left, keeping the memories of two incredible sisters. Libby hugged me warmly, thanking me for the joy we had experienced together. Thank you for everything, she said, assuring me that they would make wonderful mothers. I confidently replied that I was not worried about the children, climbing into my truck and leaving forever. On the way, I stopped at a cafe with Wi-Fi to access the internet for the first time in a week, and came across unexpected news. The FBI has launched an investigation against Congressman Johnson for his financial fraud related to Mexican drug couriers using his land to cross the border. The articles claimed that he was going to turn in his business partners, many of whom had considerable influence. At the same time, Billy Bob Jenkins was declared a serial bank robber, involved in robberies across 5 states and a murder during one of the heists. These revelations were an absolute surprise to me, as I had never anticipated that my trip would end with such shocking discoveries. Checking my email, I noticed that over the last 2 days my family, my wife, daughter, and brother, had been trying to reach me. I immediately called my brother Dennis to discuss the letter he had sent me. He started with news about the end of my vacation, and that they had finally caught the man responsible for Lasser's murder. Dennis said it was Detective Sampson who had arranged everything, so it seemed as though Tim Robbins or I could be responsible for the crime. Why was he trying to involve Tim Robbins? I asked, puzzled. Dennis replied that Tim was a good guy, and we play bowling together. He then added that Sampson had connections with the wives, including Lisa Robbins and my wife, making an awkward compliment, to which I just responded that I wasn't offended. Dennis continued, telling me that Sampson was arrested on the day I left town. That same day, there was a robbery at the National Bank, during which one of the clients was injured. The FBI analyzed surveillance camera footage to find the criminal. In one of the videos, Sampson is seen entering a building across the street from the bank and leaving 15 minutes later. Damn, what are the odds? I mused. It turned out the bank robber, caught later, had committed another robbery in the South, attempting to shoot a cashier. However, the bullet bounced off the protective screen and struck him instead. The robber died a few days later. Seems like a lot happened in my absence, I replied. Recalling the last words of Billy Bob Harrah, Dennis wasn't finished. He informed me that Congressman Johnson from Texas was at the center of a political and legal scandal. He and Mayor Smith had been friends since college, and when Smith was planning to run for Congress, Johnson told the feds about their joint smuggling of banned substances. After talking to my brother, my head was spinning from all this news. I had never faced such unexpected consequences before. Deciding it was time to leave all this behind, I deleted the letters from my wife and daughter, deciding it was time to return home and start a new chapter in my life. 2 days later, when I crossed the threshold of our home, Sandra was busy cooking dinner. She looked at me, and her eyes filled with tears. "Dad, we've been trying to reach you for the past few days," exclaimed my 16-year-old daughter Barbara, rushing to me and hugging me tightly. "Was that before or after you issued a restraining order against me?" I asked, trying to hold back my reciprocal embrace. Barbara hurried to assure that there was no order. She explained that one morning, Detective Sampson came by, accusing my wife of being involved with someone named Lasser and confiscating our phones and computers. According to him, I should not attempt to contact my family as I was wanted for the murder of Lasser. "They should have arrested you, and he didn't want us to interfere," Barbara continued, assuring that Mom and she never believed in my guilt. She described how, after a bank robbery and Sampson's arrest, the whole truth came out. Uncle Dennis clarified that Sampson accused me, despite our disbelief of his words. "He's a murderer and a liar, Dad. We were never afraid of you. We always knew you loved us," Barbara concluded, not hitting her emotions. When I brought up the question of my wife's connection with Lasser, Barbara struggled to hold back tears, pleading with me to listen to Mom. "She loves you more than anything in the world. Don't let this destroy the most precious thing we have," she insisted. Sandra, having finished preparing dinner, suggested we talk in private. Following her to the bedroom, she looked at me through tears. "Bill, I slept with Barry Lasser. Please forgive me," she confessed. "You think just an apology can fix everything? You've been acting this way for months, and now you're asking for forgiveness as if it changes anything," I responded, not hiding my hurt. "At Sue Kay's retirement party last Friday, I unfortunately drank too much, which was clearly a mistake, though it doesn't excuse my behavior. That night, Barry offered to help me get home, but instead, he took me to his place, literally dragged me into his apartment and took advantage of me. Waking up an hour later, I found him sleeping next to me without clothes, not even realizing where I was," Sandra told me through tears. "I gathered myself and left, ordering a taxi home. Do you remember how the next day you drove me to my car after I told you about my condition the night before? Why didn't you tell me what happened with Barry?" I asked, demanding an explanation. "I would have dealt with him and fed him pieces of cow dung," I continued, understanding the depth of my anger. Sandra replied that she was looking for the right moment to tell me, fearing that I would act rashly and end up in prison. She knew I could leave her, but she was more worried that her actions might land me behind bars. "You're a good person and deserve better. I won't argue if you want a divorce," she concluded. The last 10 days flashed before my eyes as I looked at my crying wife. She was clearly at her wit's end. Leaving the house, I wondered if she truly didn't believe in me and if I had enough faith in myself. I remembered believing Sampson, who informed me that Sandra and Barbara had requested a restraining order, afraid of me. I should have known them better. Thoughts of Detective Sampson, who caught me on the bank's surveillance camera, and how I blindly accused Congressman Johnson surfaced in my mind. My actions indirectly destroyed Mayor Smith's career and led to his imprisonment. I also remembered participating in a bank robbery. All this time, Sandra was apologizing to me for being in bed with a rapist, reflecting on how hard it was for her to confess this and how she cared for my well-being, being the only one who truly had a reason to apologize. Sandra watched me intently as I pondered her revelations. Everything would have been different if she hadn't overdrunk that night and ended up in Lasser's bed. It had been 10 days since then. Detective Sampson probably would never have shown up at my work, and I might not have decided to suddenly leave the city. Billy Bob might have continued his bank robberies and shootings, and Congressman Johnson, his dubious shipments of banned substances while making important government decisions with Mayor Smith. But Billy Bob, despite his ruthless character, would have achieved something good. I would never have spent 3 days enjoying the company of Abby and Libby if I hadn't made that decision. I knew I was doing the right thing, but I understood that sometimes you need to act wrongly for noble reasons. Telling Sandra about Billy Bob, Congressman Johnson, Mayor Smith, and Detective Sampson, as well as my days with Abby and Libby, was pointless. I saw no sense in it. When I confessed my love to Sandra, she hugged me tightly, allowing me to feel the warmth of her body. "I love you forever," I whispered in her ear. She responded with laughter and kisses, proud of my decision. Our daughter Barbara asked about the chances of having a brother or sister after this adventure. Sandra had already explained to me that due to complications with Barbara's pregnancy, another pregnancy could be dangerous, so we took precautions. That's how we continued to live. I wasn't planning on getting a divorce, but I was certain I wouldn't tell my wife about those days that happened to me.
That's the end of the story. Write your opinion in the comments about this story. It will be interesting for us to read it. Also, do not forget to like and subscribe to our channel so as not to miss new, equally interesting and exciting stories. Good luck!